Hello, I'm Gordon Lang, editor of CameraLabs.com. In this video I'd like to give you a brief preview around Sony's brand new full-frame mirrorless cameras, the Alpha A7 and A7R. I've got the A7R here. This is the higher end of the two models, and I'll explain those differences in just a moment. Now, this is just a preview video. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see a link directly below the video, and that will take you to my preview page at CameraLabs.com. That is the page that I'm going to update as I get to try out these cameras, learn a bit more about them, and eventually begin to post sample images and movies from final production models. So around the November time frame, hopefully you'll see a lot more content from me. So please check that out if you're watching it around then. But right now, I want to tell you about the headline features of these cameras. Most obviously, they are the world's smallest and lightest full-frame mirrorless cameras. Now, there's a few asterisks and caveats involved there. Of course, Leica has had its M series for a long time. That is a full-frame mirrorless camera with interchangeable lenses, but it is larger and heavier than this, and it also doesn't have autofocus. Then, of course, there's Sony's own RX1 and RX1R. They're mirrorless, they're full frame, they have autofocus, but they don't have interchangeable lenses. So this is where the A7 and the A7R fit into the equation. Speaking of which, a brief note on NEX. Sony has dropped the brand. You will no longer see any more new NEX cameras. You will see some APS-C mirrorless cameras, but they won't be branded as NEX. They will just be Alpha cameras. So going forward from this point, if it's a Sony camera with interchangeable lenses, it will be called an Alpha. And if it's a Sony camera with fixed lenses, then it'll be a Cybershot, and that is why cameras like the RX1 and the RX1R are Cybershot cameras and not Alpha cameras. Okay, now let's take a look at the A7 and the A7R. Now, both these cameras are physically almost identical to each other. The major difference between them is the sensor. The more affordable A7 has a 24 megapixel full-frame sensor with embedded phase detect autofocus points, which should help with continuous autofocusing. The higher-end A7R has 36 megapixels, and it also dispenses with the optical low-pass filter. That in turn should allow crisper images, although you will have to be responsible for managing any moire, which are those shimmering coloured patterns you can sometimes see on very, very fine lines that are close together or on textiles. One of the other important differences is that the A7R does not have embedded phase detect AF, so that's an important difference between these cameras. Another difference that you may not find out about in a lot of the preview videos is that the bodies are fractionally different. They are both magnesium alloy, they are both weather sealed, which is nice, but the front panel, this part, on the A7 is actually made of a plastic material which allows it to come in at a lower price point. I asked Sony about this, and they also commented that it does make the A7R maybe fractionally tougher. But that is really physically the difference between them. Interestingly, it makes the A7R fractionally lighter. It's just over 400 grams, and you can find out about those full specifications on my preview at CameraLabs.com. In terms of composition, you have got a XGA OLED viewfinder on the back that delivers a very, very large image. I was looking through this earlier, and it's roughly similar to the Olympus OMD EM1, so that is a nice big viewfinder. Interestingly, if you're an Olympus EM5 owner, the image height through the viewfinder is roughly the same. It's just wider on this because it's a 3:2 aspect ratio instead of 4:3. Alternatively, you can compose with this flip-out screen. You can flip it up here for shooting at low angles, or flip it down for shooting at high angles over the top of your head. This screen is very high resolution, but it is not touch sensitive, so that's a big difference between this and the current Micro Four Thirds cameras. In terms of other features, it has a 1/8,000th of a second maximum shutter speed. It also has focus peaking. There's plenty of controls on the body. You've got a finger dial on the front, a thumb dial on the back, another thumb wheel on the rear, and a separate dedicated dial for exposure compensation. So you can actually have this camera set up, say, in manual mode, so that one dial operates the shutter, one operates the aperture, one operates the ISO, and of course this one operates the exposure compensation, which isn't applicable in manual mode, but you get my drift. Basically, with these four dials, you can take complete control and immediate control of this camera very, very quickly and easily. On the side here, you'll see the markings for the built-in Wi-Fi and NFC. And on the other side, it's worth mentioning that the HDMI port can actually output 4K. So for anyone who has a Sony 4K HD TV, you can connect it and enjoy your pictures at that full resolution. In your hand, it feels very, very solid. I just want to show you size-wise how it compares to the OMD EM5, because I actually have one right here. This is the EM5. Now remember, this is a micro four thirds camera. The camera here has a sensor that is approximately 1/4 of the size of the sensor in this. So that is a huge difference in sensor size. I've got them both fitted with roughly an equivalent lens. On the full frame model here, I've got one of the new Zeiss 35mm f2.8 lenses. On the Olympus here, I've got the Olympus 17mm f1.8 lens. So they're both going to be delivering roughly the same field of view and with roughly the same depth of field. Now, I'm going to have to get a little bit technical here to explain the difference, but people are always talking about full frame equivalence. So this is what I'm going to do with this now. Now, as you know, with micro four thirds, because of the sensor size, there is a field reduction factor of 2 times. So a 17mm lens becomes equivalent to 34mm. So these two lenses will deliver roughly the same field of view. But there is also a 2 times reduction in the effective depth of field compared to full frame. So an f2.8 lens on full frame, if you want to match that depth of field with micro four thirds, you need an f1.4 lens. Now this is f1.8, so it actually won't achieve quite a shallow depth of field as this, but it'll be very, very close. But in terms of exposure, f1.8 is still faster than f2.8 by over a stop, which would allow you to use this lens in in dimmer conditions. You'd be able to use lower ISOs. But of course, in turn, this camera, the Sony, has a sensor that's 4 times bigger, which will mean that its results are almost certainly going to be much cleaner at higher ISOs. Of course, that is yet to be tested in practice. This is a pre-production model, so let's see what it does. But it's certainly very exciting and very impressive that Sony has managed to pack all this technology into a small body. And the lenses that it's brought out for it aren't bad either. Now, there are 5 new full-frame compatible E-mount lenses, and they're differentiating them from existing E-mount lenses by calling them FE lenses. So there's 5 FE lenses. They're also backwards compatible with existing NEX, drop that brand, existing NEX APS-C models, of course with the 1.5 times field reduction factor. Before I talk about these lenses, I'll also mention that you can, of course, put normal E-mount lenses. So if you're an existing NEX owner, you can put those lenses on this as well. It will operate in a crop mode. The 36 megapixels drop down to 24. The 24 drops down to 16, I think. I believe there's also a mode where if you want, it will let you capture the whole frame, although, of course, there'll be significant softening and vignetting in the corners. But, it might be something you want to give a shot anyway. So those lenses are backwards and forwards compatible. You can also mount A-mount lenses on this with an adapter, and Sony is doing 2 adapters for this camera. They're doing one cheaper model that doesn't support autofocus, and they're doing one that actually has the translucent mirror technology of the SLT model. So you can effectively turn this camera into an SLT if you want. So in a way, the absence of phase detect autofocus on the A7R might not be that big a deal, because just by using the adapter and the A-mount lenses, it suddenly acquires phase detect autofocus once more. Okay, the 5 lenses that are native to this format. There are 3 from Carl Zeiss, 2 primes and a zoom. The primes are a 35mm f2.8, which I have here. There is a 55mm f1.8 and a 24 to 70mm f4 constant aperture throughout the range. Sony itself also has a 28 to 70mm kit lens and a 70 to 200mm higher end lens. I believe all 5 of these models are weather sealed, so that will match the 2 bodies, which is great news. A couple of downsides though. The 28 to 70 will only be available as a kit with the A7. If you buy the A7R, you cannot buy this lens, at least not yet. And in fact, the 55 and the 24 to 70 f4 are not going to be available probably until around Christmas or even after Christmas into 2014. Which means if you buy an A7R, if you're one of the lucky people to get hold of this camera before Christmas, the only lens you're probably going to be able to use it with is the 35 2.8. Although, of course, you could put an adapter on it and try other lenses as well, so this may or may not be a big deal for you. But lens anoraks and techies and propeller heads may be at this point wondering about the focal ratios here. A 35 f2.8, 24 to 70 f4, 55 1.8. Shouldn't they all be a little bit brighter? Wouldn't it be nice to have a 55 1.4, a 35 f2, a 24 to 70 f2.8? Because after all, if Sony want to convert Canon and Nikon DSLR owners who use full frame systems into buying one of these, then they're going to want these nice bright lenses to replace the ones they've already got. But I believe the reason that Sony has gone for these slightly slower lenses is twofold. First, it allows them to be better corrected in the corners of the frame. And importantly, Sony also mentioned to me that the pixels in the corner of the frame on the sensor are actually tilted slightly inwards to minimize things like corner darkness, the vignetting effect. But still, they're quite slow. So the reason is for better quality across the frame, and also so they're not too big and heavy. Now, Sony really wants you to look at this camera and go, wow, it's tiny. It's about the same size as an OMD EM5 or especially an OMD EM1, but yet it's got a full frame sensor. That's amazing. And then you think, oh no, wait a minute, maybe the lenses are going to be bigger than the smaller formats. So what Sony has done is cleverly opted for optically slower lenses than you might expect to make them smaller and lighter. Now, that's just my opinion. Sony may say something different, you may have different views, but that's my take on it. But anyway, for lots more information, check out my preview over at cameralabs.com. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find that link below the video. Either way, it's very, very exciting that Sony has